Tonight, the latest on polling in the presidential election and what the Electoral College currently looks like. A look at protests erupting throughout Zimbabwe and insight on the Midwest pipeline that has Native Americans speaking out. This is Talking Points. Good evening, Syracuse, and welcome to the September 15th edition of Talking Points. I'm your host, Alex Amico. We begin tonight with a story that has students and faculty here on campus concerned. Universities like to flaunt their figures on diversity, and the more inclusive they are, the better. So it's no surprise that when it was revealed Syracuse's minority student population dropped almost 4% among this new freshman class, eyebrows were raised. Despite these falling numbers, Chancellor Kent Syverud insists that the university is more committed to tackling issues of diversity than ever before. Talking Points international correspondent and Posse scholar Elijah Shama is here to break down these new numbers and see if Syracuse is really becoming more inclusive. Elijah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start, if we're looking at comparable schools to Syracuse, how do we stack up with diversity?
Well, it's interesting because when you look at schools that are similar to Syracuse, most notably Boston University, we're a lot lower than them. If you look at College Factual, which ranks diversity, they're about number 243, and we're about number 353. So there's a big gap there. And if you go even further to say like NYU, they're one of the highest. They're ranked 106 in the country among national universities for diversity. Again, that's a good 200 spaces ahead of us. Duke is also at 240. So we're not really kind of holding our own when it comes to universities that you would kind of talk about Syracuse in the same breath with.
And so when you're trying to attract a diverse student body, what kind of role does financial aid play in that?
It plays a huge role because I think when we look at the numbers, there were 41% of the students that applied to Syracuse. They were minority scholars, but only 25% of them actually matriculated. And that's a big number. That means that about 20% of those students couldn't come, mostly probably because of financial reasons. And if you look at Boston University gives on average $7,000 more than Syracuse does when it comes to financial aid. And that money can mean a lot for a family.
But there are programs for diversity on campus. Notably, there's the Posse Scholar program, of which you are a Posse Scholar. Yes. How do we make sure to help those students? How do we make sure that those students can succeed once they're at Syracuse?
I think the factor comes with trying to find a way to get these students involved and make sure that they really are so far away from home, but they feel like they have a home here and they're included on campus and there are avenues for them to kind of express themselves. I come from Miami. That's a good deal of a ways away from Syracuse. And trying to find ways to kind of not only feel at home here, but find a way that I can really make a difference on campus is something that I think needs to happen generally when it comes to our minority population.
And so when you're talking about diversity on the Syracuse campus, naturally you're going to think of the general body protests from a few years ago, which started with a rally for diversity on the quad.
Yeah.
What's happened since then? Has there been any progress made?
Well, we've really seen the general body movement kind of fade away and kind of enter obscurity. A lot of those students graduated, and a lot of them actually got the stuff they wanted to achieve done. And I really think diversity has improved at Syracuse. I think the problem that we're seeing is that we took a couple steps back this last year, and a lot of people are concerned that the rate isn't fast enough. But it is improving, and a lot of these concerns are being answered. They've implemented tutoring for low-income scholars. They're increasing the Posse program, or they're maintaining Miami after having cut Atlanta and LA. So they're trying to keep a little bit of a bulwark there, and it's just yet to see whether it's going to be enough.
Right. Elijah, thank you very much for joining us. Coming up on the other side of the break, where is the money in the Trump Foundation going? We'll take a look.
This is the story of a boy who didn't talk for a long time. The boy liked things to always be the same. Any changes would scare and upset him. The unknown was an unfriendly place. The boy was very sensitive to lights and sounds. So he built secret hiding places where they couldn't get in. The boy didn't like looking people in the eye. He wasn't trying to be mean, it just made him feel uncomfortable. Sometimes he would flap his arms again and again.
One day, I found out I have something called autism. My family got me help. Slowly, I found my voice and learned all the ways I could live with it better.
Early intervention can make a lifetime of difference. Learn the signs at autismspeaks.org.
Here comes the general. We are less than 2 months away from Election Day, and the race seems to be tightening. Clinton still seems to be holding her lead nationally, but Trump is gaining ground. The new CBS and New York Times poll has Clinton up only 2 nationally, well within the margin of error. A recent CNN poll also had Trump up in both Ohio and Florida, 2 states that are crucial to winning the presidency. Despite Trump coming close, he still has a lot to go to win, in part due to the Electoral College votes. Here to break down what the map looks like right now and some problems with polling is Talking Points election correspondent Dan Prager. Dan?
Well, thanks, Alex. So if you look at the map that will be appearing behind me in just a second, you will see the general election where there's blue states, solidly blue states, and solidly red states. Now we have Hillary Clinton at about 249 electoral votes. That's only 21 away. And now the states you really want to look at with Clinton are the light blue Rust Belt states. Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Clinton has a solid lead in each of them, but she's losing ground in Wisconsin. Now, it really is important for the Trump campaign to take those states, because without it, Clinton does have a very easy path to victory. If she wins all of those states and Virginia, she wins. If she drops Wisconsin and Virginia and picks up Florida, she wins. And she's also looking a lot better in states like Georgia, Arizona, states that are usually solidly Republican. Even Texas is more of a light red state in polling right now, although it will probably go Republican. But at the same time, it's really important that Trump can take those northern, kind of moderate, anti-trade Rust Belt Democrats and take them and win this election. Alex?
Dan, with all these different polls coming up, some polls have Clinton up by a lot, some polls have Trump up, some polls have it within the margin. How do we know what to trust?
So it's a little hard with all of the polls flying around. Usually a good rule of thumb is to look at polls that have a good brand name, Pew, CNN, New York Times. But the best way to really do it is to look at a poll that's a poll aggregator, like Real Clear Politics. They take all of the polls, they kind of average them out, and they give you a pretty good number that will show where states or the national vote is about from all of the polls out there.
So one discussion that's come up in polling is the difference between automated polls and live caller polling. Is there a difference between the two in terms of the results that they bring?
So usually there isn't, but this year we've seen a really strange phenomenon where Clinton's chances, as reported by 538, have gone down to about 16% if you only factor in non-live polls. And there's a lot of different reasons that could be behind that, but it's a real issue when you're looking at polling and what to trust.
And so this possibility of having voters who are ashamed about who they vote and are more honest with an automated poll, does that help or does that hurt Donald Trump?
Well, it could definitely really help him. It goes back to something called the Bradley effect, where it's a kind of disputed rule in politics where they say sometimes people will be embarrassed to vote for one candidate, and in a live poll, they'll lie, say they're undecided, or say for the other candidate. It's usually associated with minority candidates, but in this case, Trump has said a couple of things that may make people embarrassed. But this would be a really good thing for Trump if he's gaining these voters that really aren't coming out and saying they're voting for him. It looks bad now, but it could be really good for him. Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, said, quote, "It's become socially desirable, especially if you're a college-educated person in America, to say that you're against Donald Trump. The hidden Trump vote is very significant. And if Trump can pick up just 2-3% of that vote, it will make a huge difference in a lot of these swing states like Florida and Ohio."
All right, Dan, I'm going to put you on the spot here just really quick. If you have to pick one state, what is the most important state in this election?
Ooh, I think the most important state right now might be Pennsylvania. Hillary has a pretty solid lead, but if Trump can take Pennsylvania, that might be the key to him winning. Hillary can lose Florida and Ohio and still win the general. If she loses Pennsylvania, she's in trouble.
Dan Prager, thank you very much. The 15th anniversary of 9/11 was a weekend filled with controversy for Donald Trump. After the September 11th attacks, Trump allegedly received $150,000 as part of a government program after reporting that his company was helping victims. Congressman Gerald Nadler of New York, however, has accused Trump of pocketing the money. Records from the New York Daily News report that the money went to personal uses such as cleaning, rent loss, and repair. The Trump Foundation has come under fire for where they are spending and not spending their money.
The contribution was illegal. You can't give charitable money to a political campaign. It's illegal. And because they knew it was illegal, when they filed their year-end report, they hid it. They did a cover-up. They said, no, that $25,000 went to some charity group in Kansas. But when the Kansas group was contacted, they said, we never got anything from Donald Trump.
These allegations have led the Office of the New York Attorney General to investigate the practice of the Trump Foundation.
This issue really is in my capacity as regulator of nonprofits in New York State. We have been looking into the Trump Foundation to make sure it's complying with the laws that govern charities in New York.
And as November nears, the events from this past weekend are only heightening the public's and the media's desire for Trump to release his tax returns, something that could show transparency on his charitable donations. Here with more information is Talking Points contributor Galat Malamed. Galat, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So Donald Trump has said that he will release his tax returns when his IRS audit is complete.
Yes.
Is this a valid excuse, or could he release part of his tax returns, or what's the deal here?
So given what's going on with the audit, it's not really a valid excuse because there's a chance that the audit won't even be finished before the election happens. It's actually a very likely chance. A tax lawyer at Arnston & Lur LLP said it's close to impossible. And he could release his tax returns from before what's being investigated in the audit, which would be anything up to 2008. Mike Pence has his going back to 2006, but he hasn't even released that. So those two things combined make it highly unlikely.
And so Donald Trump Jr. had a defense over his father not releasing his tax returns. Let's take a listen.
He's got a 12,000-page tax return that's under audit. What we don't want to do is create a story where then every want-to-be auditor in the country is going through and saying, what if? There's nothing there. But if there is, they're going to try to create a story.
So one criticism is that this is sort of a non-issue to most voters. Do people outside of the media care about Donald Trump's tax returns?
People outside of the media definitely do care, especially given the recent controversy going on over the weekend. Information came to light that Melania paid $20,000 for a painting of Donald Trump using the charity foundation's money. So just information like that, people want to, it's almost a fact checker. Where is this money going? Also, it's just simple precedents. The last president to not release his tax returns from a major political party was back in the election of '76 with Gerald Ford. So this is something that the public expects. Karen Flynn from the public interest group Common Cause, she phrased it very well, saying, quote, "Releasing your tax returns provides voters with a fuller picture into your background, experience, business interests, and insight into potential conflicts of interest." People want to know who they're voting for.
So as this goes on, as we keep on having this question over whether or not he will or should release his tax returns, what sort of impact does it have on the election itself?
Well, for starters, the whole big theme of this election is transparency on both sides. And it makes him harder to make this argument against Clinton that she should release her health records, she should release all the emails, when he himself is not releasing this information. If he did, it would make his argument more valid. Additionally, it's making people not trust him as much because they don't know the full story of what's going on. He already has previous lies. Forbes reported him as making $4.5 billion back in September of 2015. He said the number was $10 billion, so by him not releasing it, nobody knows what to believe. No one knows the truth.
Galat, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
When we get back, could President Obama see his first ever veto override? We'll break it down.
Visit aarp.org/caregiving for information on how to provide even better care for the person who wants to care of you.
Zimbabwe President Robert Mugabe recently unveiled a 12-foot statue of himself showing him with a fist raised in the air in what looks like a power position. Meanwhile, he's losing his grip on power as Zimbabwe is dealing with its worst economic crisis in years. At 92, he's the world's oldest leader and has ruled Zimbabwe since its liberation 36 years ago. But in recent weeks, the country's youth have taken to protest his rule, and Mugabe's ability to stifle the movement is fast eroding. Talking Points international correspondent Tom Austin has more on that story.
Thanks, Alex. Well, facing more job loss and unemployment, the citizens of Zimbabwe have had enough of President Robert Mugabe. The deficit is widening, tens of thousands of civil servants are being laid off, and high levels of corruption pervade government activity. A state of disaster was declared in February, and an estimated millions of citizens need food aid. So, organizing on social media, protesters are trying to pave a better future. This unified force is without a clear leader and calls its movement the Tajamuka campaign, and that's translated to "We Are Fed Up." They're using smartphones to record confrontations between protesters and security forces to show the brutal way in which Mugabe is responding. Most of these confrontations are happening in the capital of Harare. Activists walk around with Mugabe must-go shirts, even with the knowledge that wearing them makes them a target for beating, and according to some inside the security force, it's becoming harder for officials to follow Mugabe's orders. The orders include tear gassing protesters and using firearms. And it looks as though a real battle is brewing between security forces and protesters. But reports says even though those in Mugabe's own corner are challenging him for power. And that loyalty from the security forces is evaporating. It's only in a matter of time that this angry youth base will challenge the weakening power structure and perhaps liberate itself from its original liberator.
Thanks, Tom. Last Friday, the House of Representatives passed the Justice Against Sponsors of Terrorism Act as a response to the terror attacks of September 11, 2001. The bill essentially allows families of the victims of the attack to sue the Saudi Arabian government in American courts. While the bill moved easily through Congress, President Obama plans to veto the legislation. Here's what White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest had to say.
This law actually opens up the United States to risk of being hauled into court in countries around the world.
Supporters of the bill, like Brett Eagleson, the son of a 9/11 victim, are not pleased with the president's decision.
You ever heard the expression, it takes an act of Congress? Well, it took an act of Congress, and we did it. And to now hear that all of our hard work is going to be threatened by a potential veto is a kick in the stomach to 2,996 victims of terrorism on American soil. There is no excuse for a veto.
Joining us now to break this down is Talking Points contributor Joey Leno. Joey, thank you for joining us. So what did this vote look like in Congress when it passed the House and the Senate?
Well, it passed both houses of Congress by a voice vote, which means there isn't actually a direct tally of who voted which way. But it does mean that there was probably wide support from both
And the
parties.
House was unanimous.
Yes, the House was unanimous voice vote. The Senate was just by voice vote, but it means there was probably broad support in both houses. However, Obama has stated very clearly that he is going to veto this bill. And right now, the sponsors of the bill, Senator Chuck Schumer and John Cornyn, have said that they do have the votes to override the veto. When that veto vote takes place is still up in the air, but they have to announce when the vote will take place sometime in the next week. And it is entirely possible it won't come until after the election.
And so if this bill is to become law, if President Obama vetoes it and it is overridden, what kind of case will the families of the victims have in U.S. court?
The families of the victims, the supporters can cite the 28 pages released by the report on 9/11 more recently. They say that they take that as evidence that the Saudi government was involved. However, the pages really don't do anything more than implicate at best certain Saudi government officials. But there's no conclusive evidence in those 28 pages that would give those families a clear-cut case.
I want to bring in now Talking Points contributor Tom Viola. So Tom, if this bill were to become law, the global landscape, how would it affect that?
Well, the global landscape would largely be changed because this brings into the question the concept of international sovereignty. This would essentially be saying that you can take a foreign government to court on your own soil. And this would absolutely open up the U.S. to lawsuits from other places around the world for alleged war crimes or potential damages that way.
So that's what it looked like globally. Particularly with us in the Saudis, we have a very important, if somewhat delicate relationship with the Saudis. How did it affect that?
Well, you're exactly right. Our relationship with the Saudis is very delicate. The Saudi government has already said that if this bill were to become law, they would sell hundreds of billions of dollars in American assets off, and they have also denied any role in any of the attacks. They actually said back when the 28 pages were still classified information that they wanted them to be declassified because they believed it would clear them of any implication.
All right, Tom and Joey, thank you for joining us. When we come back, the latest on a North Dakota pipeline that has Bernie Sanders joining protests. Stay with us.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
I want to eat apples and bananas. I need to eat apples and bananas. Why can't I eat?
1 in 5 children struggles with hunger in America. Support the Feeding America nationwide network of food banks to help provide meals to those in need. Join us at feedingamerica.org.
Thousands of people are protesting a nearly $4 billion pipeline that would cross 4 states. Protests at construction sites of the Dakota Access Pipeline have been going on since early March, but have recently grown in size. Even former Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders joined the protests this week. Supporters say the pipeline will make the United States less dependent on foreign oil, but many feel that the nearly 1,200-mile pipeline is harmful to the environment and is a threat to Native American reservations. Here to explain what's at stake and what's to come is Talking Points national correspondent Sarah Nevins. Sarah, thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Alex.
So these protests have been called the largest gathering of Native Americans since the Battle of Little Bighorn. Why are so many tribes so adamantly against this pipeline?
Yeah, so members from hundreds of Native American tribes have expressed disagreement over this pipeline since it was introduced in 2014 for really 3 reasons. Firstly, they feel like it undermines the United States' commitment to investing into renewable energy sources. Secondly, the pipeline is going to cross over the Missouri River and Lake Oahe, which is the main source of drinking water for hundreds of thousands of tribe people. And so if there is an oil spill, then their access to water will be cut off. And lastly, there's fear that construction is going to damage burial and prayer sites. And so the pipeline has really reignited this long-held anger natives have with specifically the American government for taking advantage of the Native American land for its own economic gain.
So those last 2 reasons that you mentioned, the threat to drinking water and the threat to sacred sites, have actually led to some legal action recently. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so last week there actually was evidence that damage happened to certain cultural artifacts. And so one of the tribes, the Standing Rock Sioux tribe, filed an emergency request to stop construction. That was denied by a federal judge. However, the Justice Department stepped in to temporarily stop construction around Lake Oahe to address that concern. We'll know officially tomorrow if the pipeline company Energy Transfer Partners will comply with this agreement. They technically don't have to, since the pipeline, 99% of it is being built on private lands and has been approved.
So construction is scheduled to go on until December. As the protests have grown in size, there have been some arrests, there have been some injuries. We've seen some videos of private security firms spraying pepper spray on protesters and releasing dogs on protesters. What's going to come next? What happens next here?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of fear about the protests, and everyone really has their eyes on the protests right now because they're growing in size. They're not just in North Dakota anymore. They're in Washington, D.C., where Bernie Sanders is, and they're in major cities across the country, and there's a lot of attention being paid a lot of people are paying attention to it. And so I definitely think the tribes are going to continue protesting, and they'll continue to grow until they feel like their concerns are not only addressed and acknowledged, but also addressed by the pipeline company and taken into consideration.
Sarah and Evan, thank you for joining us. Finally, this past Sunday was the 15th anniversary of the September 11th attacks. We all know exactly where we were when we heard about the tragedy, and we can probably all recall the moments from the ensuing days, the candlelight vigils, the images on the television, and the school days canceled for mourning. I think that 9/11 truly was a point of demarcation in all of our lives. Our lives are broken into before 9/11 and after 9/11. Though it happened 15 years ago, we can all remember the horrors and heartbreak of that warm September morning as though it happened yesterday. But for our last few minutes tonight, I'd just like to remember a few of the many heroes of that day who gave their lives saving others. Rick Rescorla, he was director of security for Morgan Stanley. When the plane hit the tower, he evacuated his employees and then went back into the burning building to continue bringing out more people. He died when the tower collapsed, walking back up to evacuate more victims. He saved more than 2,600 lives. Wells Remy Crowther, also known as the man in the red bandana, he was an equities trader who evacuated victims when the plane hit, then made multiple trips back in to bring out survivors. He died with firefighters and police officers while helping them evacuate the towers. He saved as many as 18 lives. Leonard Hatton, he was an FBI agent on his way to work that morning when he saw the plane hit. He was not a first responder, he was not even in the World Trade Center, but he ran into the building, helping the fire department until he was killed when the tower fell. Mark Bingham, Tom Burnett, Todd Beamer, Jeremy Glick, and the other 36 passengers and crew on United Flight 93. When their plane was hijacked and they heard about the attacks in Washington and New York, they fought back. The passengers rushed the cockpit. Instead of crashing into its likely target of the Capitol building, the plane crashed into a field in Pennsylvania. Those 40 souls gave their lives to save thousands more. September 11th was one of the darkest days in our history. It's seared on our national memory like a burn. 15 years later, there is still an ugly scar. But as we continue to grieve and reflect, we remember the heroes of that day. On a day that showed us the depths of human evil, they showed us the heights of human courage, selflessness, and love. There's a poem that was written shortly after 9/11 that I think is an appropriate elegy for the heroes of that day. Travelers, go and tell the wide world, here we lie protected under this ground. We calm citizens, fathers and mothers at rest. There was no hatred in our hearts. Evil death snatched us from our daily lives. Now we are heroes. Now we are the stars of the heavens. And that's all we have for tonight. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm Alex Amico. Good night.